should have kept.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2023 Case Festival. My name is Robbie Luckett. I'm professor of history at Jackson State and director of the Margaret Walker Center. I've been on the faculty and director here for 14 years, and I am excited that we are now in our 17th incarnation of the Case Festival, which is really remarkable, and just grateful for all of you for being here. And thank you, Dr. Denard. Yes, worth a round of applause. 17 years we've been doing this. But what's really worth the applause are those students who were here today presenting. I had a chance to sit in on every session so far, and they have been amazing, y'all. They really have. So I'd like to offer those guys a round of applause as well. Margaret Walker, Margaret Walker founded the Center as a Black Studies Institute in 1968. We've been on campus doing the work of that institute ever since. Today, we operate as a museum and archive dedicated to the African American experience on campus. We welcome you to engage the Margaret Walker Center, our programming, our collections. Come see us, come visit the Kotho Civil Rights Education Center, which we also operate on campus, which served as the statewide headquarters in 1964 for Freedom Summer. It's a very special place. Margaret was known for hosting some of the very first conferences on the topic of Black studies anywhere in the nation, right here at JSU. That included conferences like the National Evaluative Conference on Black Studies, and in 1973, what she called the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, which celebrated the bicentennial poems on various subjects, religious and moral, written by Phyllis Wheatley. She invited 30 of the leading Black women writers in the world to Jackson State, and they all came. This coming November, we will celebrate with the 50th anniversary reconvening of the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival. We have 10 of those original women still living and 7 are returning. That includes the likes of Alice Walker, Sonia Sanchez, Paula Giddings, Charlene Hunter Galt, and they will be joined in intergenerational conversation with the likes of a new generation of Black women writers who many of you know, Nicole Hannah-Jones from the 1619 Project, Amani Perry, whose book South to America just won a National Book Award, Mississippi's own Jesmyn Ward, who's won 2 National Book Awards, and for my money may be the greatest living American writer today, Angie Thomas, Mississippian, whose work, of course, best known through The Hate U Give. Join us November 1st to the 4th for this 50th anniversary reconvening. Students may participate for free. You just have to register. Free student registration November 1st to the 4th. For any students who are traveling, we have opportunities for student travel stipends of up to $300 to support your coming to the festival in November. You can check out our website, www.jsums.edu/Phyllis Wheatley. That's the Jackson State homepage /Phyllis Wheatley to learn more about registration. For general registration, it's only $75 for all events. That's it, $75. This is going to be a groundbreaking event. Now, I will say the inspiration for the Case Festival and for our participation in the Case Festival as a center is rooted in those conferences that Margaret hosted on this campus, like the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival. We're proud to be able to continue that tradition of bringing incredible scholars and artists and writers together with students, with the chance to make connections, to be lifted up and supported in their work, and to find mentoring, mentorship, and opportunities to present. And so we're very happy to be here today for the 17th time with the Case Festival. We're particularly happy for this lunch conversation to feature Dr. E. Howard Ashford, who was raised in Kosciuszko, the son of Charles Ashford and the late Mrs. Linda Ashford. There's so much in his bio you can read. I'd say the thing that we're most proud of is the fact that he is a Jackson State graduate, came out of our program here in the history department, and has gone on to have quite the career at SUNY Oneonta as assistant professor in the history department and the Interim Director of the Center for Racial Justice and Inclusive Excellence at SUNY. His book, which is sitting up here by chance, Mississippi Zion, The Struggle for Liberation in Attala County, 1865 to 1950, has been winning all the awards. Book of the Year from the Mississippi Historical Society, a finalist for the Book of the Year from Attala, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and the National Council of Black Studies. We're so lucky that Dr. Ashford has traveled all this way to be with us this week and to tell us more about his journey from Jackson State student to faculty member and the work he has done on Mississippi Zion, this incredible award-winning book. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ashford.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think my voice carries enough, but it's an honor to be here. It's been 10 years when I graduated here, which never thought that in those 10 years a lot would change in my life. My mother, who passed away, getting a job straight out of school, becoming a department chair, and to have a book, and one that has been received the way it has been received. So I'm going to hold that, and we're going to go back in time a little bit, which I like film. So it's almost like a mahogany moment where they start the film and they pause and then they tell the story leading back up. This book would not have happened if I was not here at Jackson State. When I enrolled in Jackson State in the spring of 2000, I think it was 2011, I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. Which I had a bachelor's, I had a master's in 2 different fields, accounting and whatever degree number 2 was in, that policy. And I didn't know what my journey was. I knew that my passion was genealogy and history, but for some reason I convinced myself not to go into my passion, because then it would just become a job and then it wouldn't be something that I love to do. If you had that thought in your head, lose it. And I tell my students to always go with your passion. If not, that's where you will end up anyway, and to not spend a whole, one thing that I spent was lots of time on a journey, and money and student loans to also do as a story aside as well. But Jackson State taught me a lot of things. One, it taught me how to write, how to think. I had some incredible people to teach me, professors who taught me, and 2 are right here. I think most notably is Dr. Davis, Denoro Davis, taking his class Monday nights. No one has ever made my stomach churn with nervousness as he did. He taught me standards in writing, standards in what is scholarship, what he would accept and would not accept. And when I took his class in 2011, I think in the fall term, he gave me an I. I did all the work, he gave me an I. I was like, okay, and incomplete means that work was not submitted. So when I came back in January, I inquired, why did I get an I and not a grade? And he said, because you can do better. And he said, now, if you want the grade that I was originally going to give you, I know I can do that, but I want to give you the chance to go back and resubmit the work because I know what you can do and this is not what you can do. So he gave me an I. And that kind of restorative, I think, grading is what I use today with my own students. But it did teach me to slow down and to think about what it was like I wanted to do and to write. And when I graduated here, I knew I loved history. I knew that like if I wanted to teach history, that I needed to go onward. My doctorate at UMass Amherst came because I went to Jackson State University. John Bracy, the late John Bracy, who was department chair and my mentor, he advocated that I be in that he told me that if I had not gone to Jackson State, he would not have pushed that I be into the program, because he said that the program was selecting students who were not, who were from a particular kind of background. They were, the West Coast, the Northeast, some in the Midwest, none out of the South. Then he said, also, we don't have any students who have gone to it like a Jackson State or Morehouse, HBCUs, and along came you, both. That you're, and he said that is what set me apart, is the actual cultural, historical kind of experience of living it and then being able to bring that to a department that he at the time felt was kind of losing its image, it's losing its roots, its culture. And so I thank him for seeing that, seeing the worth of schools like Jackson State, because as I was growing up being told that, oh, you have to go to a Mississippi State and Ole Miss, or no, people won't hire you because they won't be seen as legitimate schools. Myth and stupidity. If it wasn't for Jackson State, literally I would not be here. I would not have been on his radar. And so I want to thank Jackson State, not only for what it taught me, but really for showing to dispel those types of myths and stereotypes, that schools such as this are still that important, and that they will always have a space and a place, no matter where you're going on through in life, they still hold a heavy weight to it. So I will always be, I think, indebted to this college. And from what I learned here and the studies that I did at UMass, which is what led to this book being written, like Mr. Zion, was the fact that I got tired of hearing about what Black people didn't do. I got tired of hearing about only hearing struggle in a connotation through a white lens. And to backtrack from there, growing up, I had a love of my own, like who were my parents and grandparents and what school did they go to, and genealogy. And whether it's cliche or not, after seeing Roots, my mother, who made me watch Roots as a young child, never understood why we had to watch Roots. But at the end of Roots, part one, because there's the part two, where he's going over Chicken George and Matilda, had so many children, and so forth. That sparked my interest in wanting to know who it was that I came from. And so genealogy is the root of my book, or it's kind of where it grows from. It's not necessarily a story of me, but it's the story of people. It's the story how people over time grew and what they did and what is the impact of what they did. And the journey of this book was rather interesting. I'm not gonna say it was hard. I'm gonna say it was interesting, because many people did not think that this book was real, that it was not rooted in realism, that this, because like Mississippi has a reputation, which it has earned on its own accord. However, though, the actions of others should not dictate what other people actually did, or what they did not do. And so when people hear the states naming Mississippi, they either say, so sad that you had to live through that experience, or people are still getting lynched there, or that I refuse to go there. The same kind of stereotypes that come along with the name, that's a territory. But that's what Attala County, though, they did not believe that Black people did the things that I was saying that they did, that they actually owned land in the amounts of land that they owned, and what they spent to get the land, that they voted in the hundreds even after the rules were changed to try to stop their voting, that they did things that were quote unquote outside the norm. And it was more an attack on the state itself and the Black people who lived in the state, but whether or not I was a true historian, as I was told on day one at UMass, if you want to do genealogy, then go to Harvard and skip Gates. We do history here. And so I would, that's after being excited to go to UMass. But I knew that there was a story here. It wasn't just my people, my ancestors, but it was countless hundreds of other people in one location doing things that I had been taught that they did not do because that history was not necessarily taught in school. But I wanted to combine it all together, not just another book on land owning or teaching or voting, but to combine it together to show what is the impact of Black power. And that's where in my department it became the issue. Black power did not exist in 1865. It's 1965 in Stokely Carmichael. And if you want to argue Black power, then you want to be here for another 6 or 7 years, because it was not going to be something that even Dr. Gracie was not on board with that word Black power. Let's change it. Let's find something else, because he did not necessarily see that existing in the time period that I was looking at. But I was bent on showing that it is Black power that is the roots and the origins of Jim Crow. That Jim Crow society does not just spring up out the ground, and that the same people such as Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner, all of a sudden, once the ink has dried, Black people did nothing but just sit and wait until the 60s come around, or they wait on a Booker T. Washington and a Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, etc. And I want to show the people that those individuals are speaking for. So in the process of writing, I was in and out of UMass very quickly. I did 3 years of coursework, and I did 1 year of writing, and I was finished in 4 years. Dr. Gracie told me, do not stay around and wait around. You have a dissertation. You and I are probably not going to agree. I had to make some tweaks on power. I couldn't argue that directly to get out of the program. But what he did say was that you're on to something. Before I actually wrote what is now the book, when I was talking about this is what I want to actually discuss, my committee spent 2 hours talking about my project. That's after I spoke for 10 minutes, they spoke for the next 2 hours about my project, debating. And when I looked discouraged, and then being told that if we're still speaking about it, that means that you are onto something. That means we're debating what you are going to be speaking about, and that is of his scholarship. And so I wrote the dissertation, went through the process, it passed. I got a job that's like right out the gate. That's which I was extremely happy, because I was told no a lot of times before I was told yes. So, and I tell my students, all it takes is one person to say yes. So, everyone doesn't have to say yes to it. So I wanted to write the book quickly, because the tenure track, the one thing that you don't necessarily always control is research and publications, because it goes through review processes, and you never know when people are going to get back to you, if it's going to be accepted, when it's in print. So I started at Oneonta in 2018 fall. My contract came a year later in November. That's Attala. I went to Attala. I spoke about a chapter in my book on Jim Crow's children, which was looking at the role of Black women who changed the perception of society with mixed race children. And so I met with 2 people that day. One press, when I was talking about Black power and liberation, and moving aside this notion of reconstruction, his eyes rolled in the back of his head, so I knew that he was not interested. Next move over, I struck gold. And I think that I was pleasantly surprised with the open, mindedness of the press that eventually I went with, or who went with me. I'll put it like that. I didn't have a lot to choose, and so I was just very grateful that. And when I wrote what really was still at that time, it wasn't the book, I turned it in, and the reviews came back, the reports came back. They hated it. Where are the white people? There weren't enough white people in my book to meet, who's allowing all these Black people to buy land, and who's allowing them to vote? Where's the white agent that's allowing this to happen? And it was consistent across, this is no, he needs to read plantation records, he needs to look at Freedmen Bureau records, like I hadn't already. But this notion that white people had to be central in a book about Black people's history. And so I spoke with my editor, Emily, and I said, no, of course, I'll restructure and things of that nature, but I'm not going to insert people where they were not meant to be inserted just to make people happy who may have a more understanding of traditional history, but not necessarily Black studies. So I rewrote it, and so it went back for review in January of 21. By March of 21, it came back perfect. It was ready to go. Last minute changes and edits, it got the approval. No, it became what is today my book, which is Mississippi Zion, which I'll go into a little bit in terms of what the book actually challenges and what I like to think is the response that it has gotten, which is to me very surprising and very humbling. I did not think that this was going to be the next Du Boisian style work that was going to be discussed, but I did want to use the story of people and not necessarily the thought processes of a Du Bois or Washington, et cetera. So that's a Mississippi Zion. The central argument is that the roots of Jim Crow are rooted in Black power, that Jim Crow is the response of white society to Black people moving at a rate that was not expected of them. However, though, Black people are not taking into consideration what white people think because they don't care. And so it's really, in a sense, like emphasizing a society where white people intervene in Black life and Black society. However, though, Black people they're not going through their everyday life thinking, if I do this, what's going to be the right kind of reply to it. And so when they come to see what is a collective response to just everyday action and trying to uplift themselves out of a condition that was put on them. So the book chronicles a county that had not been discussed in the state's history. It's not a county in the Mississippi Delta. We love the Delta, primarily because there are more Black people who live in the Delta, and this county didn't have it wasn't where Black people were only like 2% of the population. So like what they did wouldn't necessarily draw attention. This was a county where it was equal in terms of numbers amongst like Blacks and whites. And so how does a society look where in terms of Black and white people, it's an equal number of people, and then that's in a county that had not necessarily been discussed before. And the archives in the county were brilliantly left intact. They had not been burned or torched or lost over time. And so all the records were just there to be looked through and to be analyzed. And so it's really the story of people. It's the story of people who may have known each other, who may not have known each other, people I may be descended from, people that Oprah Winfrey may be descended from, and Morgan Freeman and James Meredith. And all of us come from this county. So it's therefore like this county, it must have something important going on here. So chapter by chapter, it does break down, but at the same time showing what is the overlap of education and land and voting. The responses to it is not necessarily stagnated to show change over time. And by exploring the lives of people that most of us would never have heard of, and unless they were in print today, shows this active element of Black life and society that is not a response to whiteness or how whiteness looked at Black people, and really Black people did not care. They're not trying to be white, they're trying to make themselves more than what they were, and that necessarily does not need a white person to give their check of approval. And so, but the book also challenges this notion of traditional historical timelines, reconstruction. I basically say it doesn't exist amongst Black people. What are they trying to reconstruct after slavery? They're not trying to reconstruct the old self. They're not trying to, they're trying to construct themselves. They're trying to be truly free. And so it's saying that Reconstruction does exist, but it doesn't shape the Black experience. So once Reconstruction ends, doesn't mean that that's the end of Black movement, Black people attempting to do X, Y, and Z. And I took on the heavyweights, as they call the heavyweights of the historical field. Stephen Hahn, etc. Not that I deliberately did it, it's just the notion of common sense history, to stop trying to fit Black people necessarily within a time span that may or may not apply to them in the way that we apply it to more of a general style history. And the stories of the people, I think are exceptional. They're not made up. The pictures that I used, I wanted to show Black people in their everyday existence, not with the overalls, not sitting in front of a log cabin, but studio pictures, suits and ties and dresses and color and all this, to show a humanity attached to Black people, and that this is merely just what they did. They were trying to be truly free. That's in terms of the labor, the economics, the mentality of and also just wanted to be viewed as people whose society had already bestowed Blackness upon them. So they knew that they were Black. They knew that they had a common experience. And at the same time, though, they weren't going to be stopped by another group's notion of what they should be. And the book more so ends with so this was intended to be a 100-year study, to go through 1960s and Ole Miss, James Meredith, who's of this county, but then I was told 100-year study is basically 2 books in one, and you would have to kind of shift characters, shift the historiography. And so I was encouraged to split it in half by Dr. Bracy, who was a brilliant man. And so that was a kind of a wise choice to kind of split it in half and leave on what I would call more of this book leads into kind of what we more so traditionally study now, is what is the Black response to Jim Crow. This book, it more so captures the spark that leads to what we know of as Jim Crow today, but to show it as rooted in Black power. The one story in here, which I will say, a vignette or story, how you want to put it, that causes people that I've talked to the most head scratching is the Black couple with the white maid who lived in their household. That's in the 1880s. To them, it could not happen. A Black couple, don't care how light they were or whatever, no Black couple could employ a white woman to live in their household when there's a able-bodied Black man and a Black butler who lives there as well. And that was really even with Dr. Bracy said, he came up with every explanation he could think of to try to say why this white woman is working in this Black household. But even in my own, not just him, it was a head scratcher. And that's what this book is more so. It debunks this notion of white power and looks at more as, I say Black power, but in terms of what really counts, which is money. And which I argue, we have 2 people who have money. They chose to have a white maid and a Black butler. Why do they have to have a Black maid? There are other people who live near them that have a Black butler or Black maids, but what is it just to probably say, okay, I don't want my children to see themselves as being only based at domestics. They know that they had 3 children at the time, 2 were girls and 1 was a son. Why not be able to show that they want to show their children, especially young girls, that there is more to life than being a maid? And and the best way to kind of throw that notion out there is to hire a white maid. And this woman that's discussed in the book, she was a maid who worked with the judge, and the judge died, and so then she went on to work with this Black family. So they got to know someone that came from a very high status background, at least in terms of, but that one still is a head scratch. People are still trying to debunk that one. And the fact that there was nothing that happened to them, what could people do? It was her choice to work there. It wasn't like, it wasn't like they chained her to the household, and so it's things like that that really, I believe, captivates what makes this book special, is that it's not pulling from all over the state of Mississippi or all over the South to make one collective example. All of this happened in one place, which is ironically centered in the heart of the state of Mississippi. The chapter on voting, yes, you do have laws, but Black people say, okay, we already know how to read, we already know how to write. That was the point of going to school. That's why there are so many Black teachers. And so these rules were really pretty much just there, but it didn't say stop Black people themselves to vote. And that's why you then begin to see more steps being taken, because power will see power. And you will not try to suppress a group that is not a threat to you. And that's one of the things that I try to teach my students, is that why would you go after a group that does not, that's not going to threaten you at all? All of these things are coming because you as a group, whether it's one or more, you are seen as a threat to a status quo. And therefore, you're going to design everything that you can to try to slow down. And the book ends with the Great Migration, the people who started the book, they begin to die off. And therefore, and you begin to see the true weight of what we now study as the state of Mississippi, the white South, white power, began to come down. And it kind of norms into a traditional understanding of Jim Crow life and society. And that is the book in a sense. The response to it, again, I will say the awards, the Book of the Year awards with NCBS and MHS was completely not expecting, because this is a very in-depth look. It's a case study, but it kind of builds out as it's connected to the state and the region of the South and the entire country. But just the fact that people, one, read it, and then two, found it to be, I think, to get these awards and recognitions. I guess I can call it luck, I can call it good writing or good training, but all of that to say, back to the present day as to where I stand, none of that would have happened without Jackson State University. And so I always believe in coming home. While it did take me 10 years to come home, it's a 2-day train trip either way. I don't like to fly, but I am happy to be back home, and I'm happy to be here today speaking. And don't know if we can take questions or what, but that is my talk and presentation on Mississippi Zion.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm from Holmes County.
Neighbor.
Attala, that's right, neighbor Salas.
Yes.
I have my aunt married into Salas.
Okay.
Johnson family.
Okay.
Sydney and Johnson. You were talking about land, so my uncle and his siblings have about 200-some acres of land, and my uncle is one of 2 siblings left living.
Mm-hmm.
So they have all this land out there. And you were talking that there was a criticism that was not an insertion of white America as to how the land was acquired. I'm interested in knowing exactly what did you find out there, because as far as my uncle can remember, they've had that land. Is it possible that the African Americans could have bought it from another African American? So I just wonder how you were able to respond to that intelligently.
Yes, so that's a great question. The land chapter really examines how did Black people where did they get the means to actually get the land in terms of the money. And people have to understand that coming out of the war, white people were not rich per se. Is that everybody was hit hard, and therefore you could not be as particular as who you chose to meet with. And I'm only going to do this with white people in terms of my land will only be sold to only other white people. Black people understood capitalism more than anyone else because they themselves were human capital. And so what I did discover is that if you look at the contracts that many Black people went into with white individuals, what they actually earned. So they would earn bushels of corn, hundreds of bushels of corn, meat, pork, wheat, grain, and therefore you use what you need to survive, and the rest is that you take on to that's like a local store market, and you make money off of that. And that, so that's the money you use that you buy land with. And white individuals could not, let's say, turn down green money or gold, whichever one that you're dealing with, just because the person who's holding it is Black. And so Black people understood at the end of the day what really accounted was money. And then with that, in reading the records, they bought the land, they did not buy the land they did work for X amount of years. They paid for it $100 cash in hand, $2,000 with money, not that they put these liens on their land. And then with that, as Black people bought land, they did business with other Black people. And and that's in the records to showcase that not every agent that is doing the land dealing is white. And we may want to assume that, but that's where genealogy comes into play, is that you have to know the people. And there were many instances where Black people's land came from because their dad had land or their mother had land, they died, which is in a will, it goes to the children and the inheritances, and that's how also Black people also got land, at least as we go through time. But there are stories where Black people would only buy land from other Black people if they had to take out a loan on their land. They did the loan with somebody else that was Black. So in case that they had to default, that land went to another Black person and not to someone that was white, because land was power, land was liberation, and therefore you don't give it back to the group that you know will kind of use it to kind of not help you go forward. So at least you're keeping it within, quote unquote, the community.
So thank you. And I was, as you were talking about that, my mind went back to when I taught an advanced English writing course at Mississippi Valley State. One of the students who worked for the Holmes County, I think it's the circuit clerk's office, Chancery Clerk office. Which one deals with land and tax?
Chancery Clerk.
So she worked with the Chancery Clerk's office. And she found that a lot of the land that white America had acquired had actually been at the unfortunate loss of African Americans whose parents from the early 1900s and late 1800s did air property. Mm-hmm. And when those families moved away, you had one person that was paying the taxes in Mississippi that stayed, and when that person died, nobody up north was ever going to come back. So they lost the land, and white America would go into the office and pay those taxes. So the girl was trying to do, the young lady was trying to do an awareness to Black America about air property, go on and separate the property, because we're losing it to not just white America, but to others, we're losing the land. So even if you were to go back and do a trace, perhaps some of that could have happened, that land that is widely owned by other ethnic backgrounds was once owned by African Americans who lost it in that type of situation.
You're exactly right. The records, a lot of the records where Black people are in court is over that reason, because they own land that's as a group, and then one person is paying the taxes, or one person does something with their share of the land and gets everyone else in trouble. So then they have to split up the land, and people just lose interest in it, or know that they're don't have a good lawyer, and that's how they lose land that way. But that was actually quite common, especially as those who got the land to start with, as they died and did not have a will and testament, and it just went down through the children. That's how eventually the land does get lost. And then as people move north, they don't want to have any kind of connection to the South, and therefore the taxes don't get paid, and that land, so that's why the book has to stop, because you do get a change in generations and a change in mindset. And so, but yeah, so what started out with this need to own land, it kind of loses its weight as people move about, and land or the state itself just is not as, it's just not what they want to call just like home anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions for you. The first, what made you decide on Jackson State to attend? And then the second question was just how did you find the story of the Black family for having a white native archive? What was the archival process for you?
So I chose Jackson State because my grandmother came here to do some studies. So I knew that I had a connection to the school, at least through that way. And I wanted to go to a college that was historically Black. My undergrad itself was not the experience that I had necessarily wanted. So that was, and two, I was a bit older at the time as well. So, I knew that I was just going to come in, get my degree and leave. And so I felt that I wouldn't get caught in trying to relive being, young again, a 20-year-old, 18 to 20-year-old. But the school's history is what drew me here, and the fact that they did have what I wanted to get my degree in. And then as far as the story of the white maid with the woman in question, and the people that had the maid were my great. That's aunt and uncle. That's George and Harriet Rice Adams. They're in the book I talked about. So that's where genealogy comes into play. And so it was while researching my own genealogy that I come across this unique story. And really that's all it was, is a record that's 1880 showing her that's in the household. Not at the end where someone could mistake, well, that's the start of a new household. She's wedged within the household with there's like underneath her, I think it's the butler, who's Andy Ashford, who is also a cousin of mine going back kind of thing. But then looking at George and Harriet, that they were educated, they owned land, their children went on to become teachers, and grandchildren went on to become teachers. And therefore, the question is why? And so I can only give reasons as to why, but that's how I came to discover that it's really by looking at my own self-history, and that's still one of the most unique things I've seen, because I have not been able to discover it written down. At least I think that was the part that kind of shook people, was that it was written down on the record that someone who was most likely white went to this Black home and took down this information, and the world did not come down on these people. Nobody was lynched by it or anything of that nature. And the woman at the time was not like, too old to where she witnessed, where she could not have children like that. At the time, she was 39 years old. So she could, therefore it's not this older white woman, it's a relatively young white woman who's living in a household with two Black men. Not one, not the father, but also the butler as well. And so, but yes, it was just like it was just by looking up, who was in what household at the time. So the look of the jaw and the look that it was just so happened to be my great uncle and uncle.
Can you speak more on the pushback against your work from other scholars, academic readers that you may have received? And also, do you feel like the backlash would have been, well, if any backlash, would have been the same if you were of a different view?
Can you state that again?
Can you speak more on the pushback against your work from other scholars, academics, readers, and do you feel like it would have been the same type of pushback if you were non-Black?
So the pushback, I believe, is that, and this is more a trend, at least in Black studies departments and programs, is that the people who are teaching in those departments are not trained in Black studies. That they come from English, they come from political science, they come from other degree programs that they somehow take it, but they teach Black studies through a traditional kind of viewpoint of a whiteness kind of viewpoint per se. So I think a lot of it came with the lack of, training in Black studies. I think many scholars do not like to be told that what they've been studying not saying it's wrong, but you may want to nuance it a little bit. And to them, I also, as I was told after I left, after I got my degree, is that my department necessarily did not respect me because I came out of Mississippi and then I went to Jackson State. It was also this element of the class that I wasn't educated enough. So, but if my skin color had been different, would it have been a different story? Absolutely. I think, no, it's like, I think I just kind of contradicted myself. Absolutely. I think that the kind of respect that the department had of like Stephen Hahn and trying to think who wrote Reconstruction. That's Eric Foner. How they kind of they were Mount Rushmore of history, and you dare not go against them, and because your grade could suffer if you did go against them. And so I think it's the lack of training, and people have bought into a set way of looking at Black people and the Black experience. And I think I came across a little bit more Booker T. Washington comes north than, I wasn't necessarily viewed as a Martin Delaney or a W.E.B. Du Bois. I think I came across too conservative for their taste as well. So, but I like to think that this book, as they say, is very pro-Black. It just doesn't, it just does it through the lens of the actual people themselves. And I think that is the response to the book, is that it's not using the usual historical people to tell the story. But I can't say that no one has emailed me to say congratulations. So that's also could be a bit more telling as well.
I guess my question would be, what advice do you give, because we have some students in the session, what advice could you give to us about, because you say the lack of training in Black studies, what advice could you give to help us toward that goal, being trained in Black studies and taking up these spaces so it's more awareness?
The first thing that I would say is read. I was very underread when I went to UMass. And you have to read not just things written by Black authors, you have to read everything. Because one of the things that I learned very early was in year one of my program, we were reading a book by someone that was white. I was like, why? No, this is a Black studies program. Why aren't we reading works about Black people? And I was asked a simple question. How many books have you read? And at the time, I thought it was like a real question, not more as someone throwing shade. And now that I look back, was that I was underread. That, if you only read people who look a certain way, then you're assuming that they themselves, that they know the whole story. That you have to have a general that's understanding. One is what is history, and two, how has that history been written. And you have to be critical of how, like anyone writes history, or writes the Black experience within history. So I will say that that's where to start, is just make sure that it's not the person who writes it, it's what they're writing. And then two is write what you want to write. Don't feel that you have to write to fit within a particular box, because that box really doesn't exist. So that's how you're going to take up space. People told me that you can't write genealogy. Genealogy is too personal. Genealogy is history. But I did it anyway. Because my critique of what was being put out in terms of scholarship was that it's how many ways can you talk about Jim Crow through one kind of narrative and lens. And you'll find that there are people out there that want to make books that push the envelope, and you don't push it if you're too afraid to just write, quote unquote, what is expected of you. And take the pushback, take the critique, take the mockery, because all that shows is that you like have hit a nerve, but that's a good nerve. That means, again, if people are talking about your scholarship or trying to say, well, that's not really a book, that means it really is a book. And so when people themselves are challenged by even your own thoughts, that means that you're on to potentially good scholarship. And one thing that I was told, that anyone can get a book made or published. Not everyone does scholarship though. So that will be one of the things to say, is to just start reading and kind of know who are the major works in the field of Black studies and start there, because that's your alphabet. And so was taught at UMass in year one was one class of major work that was 1 year long. And every week we had 1 to 2 books a week to read, big books, because that was your alphabet. If you didn't know that, then you don't know Black studies, kind of thing. So that's where I would say start, and then just write your passion. Just write it and be open to constructive critique and criticism. Though I had to be reined in a lot, because I was out there. I had to be reined in. Even the book's title, it wasn't Zion at first, it was Mecca, because I'm Muslim, and Dr. Bracy said, how many Muslims are there that live in the state? It's in Mississippi. No, it's like realistically your title, and plus you're assuming that you're saying that this place still exists as it was, that it hasn't changed, that this generally is a Mecca. And it's like Zion has more of a connection to the Black church in the rural South and this notion of home. So I had way loftier arguments and objectives that had to be reined in. And so just be open to people those who really want to see you succeed but not necessarily trying to deter you of writing what it is that you want to write. And I would say that would be a great place to start.
I just have to ask this question.
Yes.
I'm wondering how many people in Attala County read your book, even, and I know that McAdams and Cosgrove High School are predominantly Black now, right? I know McAdams was.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how many the people from your county have actually read the book. And I asked that question because I got my biggest introduction to African American history in Mississippi College.
Okay.
WI right around the corner. I'm sitting in a class where these students have read books by, I'm the only Black in most of my classes, and these students have read these books by Black authors. I had to get on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living the experience. I need to read about this. So I got my biggest experience, and sometimes I wonder where our HBCUs are missing the point of Black authors, Black work, introducing that early, when I am a witness that my first mass introduction was at Mississippi College on my second master's degree.
I know there are a lot of people at home who got the book, that they ordered the book. Now, have they read the book? That's a completely different story. I think that many like to peruse it to see, did I mention their ancestors, any pictures? But I could say no one has come up to me yet. It's still relatively a new book. It came out in July of last year, but no one's come up to me yet to say, I agree with the line that you talk about Black voting and the fathers and the son, and this is true, that's like mental kind of freedom and liberation. No one's gotten that deep yet. There has been talks about it being taught, I think, in the high schools. Well, I'm open to that. It has to be actually taught. Just to have the book, but who's going to actually teach it is a different story. So I know that people have it. I can't honestly say if people have, quote unquote, read it. So I think that would be the answer to that question. But I do think that it is a good introduction to Black studies in terms of the works that I draw on, and just also just history in general too. Yes.
What is your take on current situation of Black, particularly we find ourselves in Mississippi and other southern states that are banning what they have coined, critical rights theory, which is just history taught truthfully. And with your desire to teach Black history, where does that lead you, and what will be your paradigm shift?
The shift is, or how, at least I would say this book has been received by white individuals in the state, at least, those that I think have read it, has been positive, because the book isn't about them. It's just really not about them, nor does it attack anybody. It's telling a story of Black people, and it's not trying to paint any particular group in any particular light. So white people are not the villain, Black people are not the victims. These are just Black people who are coming out of slavery with a sense of freedom, liberation, and that just does not require necessarily white intervention. And therefore, I think because white people are not really in the book to be critiqued, I mean, they're in there, and I go after more so specific people as opposed to a collective group, that I think that people will read any particular work the way that they want to read it. I think that will stem from their understanding, I think, of history. But I think by not, at least in the introduction, using words that are more so conclusions, or whether it's white supremacy or those are conclusions. That's not, you can conclude that that's what this is or something of that nature. But I always say just stick to the facts. And, if people want to put it in a particular box, they can. But I think that for Black studies, in a story about Black people, they have to be the heart of their own narrative. They have to be the center of their own narrative. And I think oftentimes books are written thinking that you have to center a white villain for Black people to respond to, and therefore Black people are not really at the heart. They're more spinning around an object per se. But that's the shift. I mean, not that yes, you include people where they need to be included, and you just let the chips go as to where it's going to go. I haven't heard anyone critique the book as being anti anything or going too lax on slavery or things of that nature. It just presents it in a tone where, if you want people to read it, the tone has to be more where people at least open up the book, or get through the introduction and begin to go through it and go through it and go through it. I will say that one of the most interesting things is to have a white individual call me. He's a lawyer, so when his number was on my phone, I was like, oh, great, I'm about to be sued for something. Called me to say himself, this should be taught in schools. And so what I'm getting is, it's not offensive to us, to groups, or that it's a truthful understanding of the complexity of race and class in the South. So, but just don't center someone else in your narrative. I think that's the biggest thing that I can I can say from that, because this really is a book about Black people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
I'm just in here shaking.
Let's have a round.
Thank you all.
Dr. Ashford, we're so proud of you, and what an incredible talk. Thank you so much. And the inspiration for our students, and man, just really proud of you. And it's so good to see you back on this campus.
And one last thing. I'm going to give these books to your center, and you can give them out as awards for students, because I don't like to profit off of things that I want to give back to Jackson State. So, and so I will donate these books to your center, and you can dispense them.
You hear that? I was about to make an announcement that we have copies of the books for sale here, but you heard it here first. If you'd like, should they? Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll make them free for students, but everyone else has to buy one. Thank you, Dr. Ashford. It's incredibly generous. We're, again, so proud of you. We have about 25 minutes or so before our next session starts at 1:30, our last set of student concurrent sessions here on this floor and across the way in the Johnson Hall Art Gallery. I hope all of you will make plans to return at 3 o'clock for the closing keynote address by Dr. Mary McGraham, who is with us, as well as the awards, including the $1,000 Margaret Walker Award for the best essay by a JSU student on the Black experience in the American South, and the $500 Dr. Doris Derby Visual Arts and Social Justice Award, which Dr. Derby, before her passing, endowed here at Jackson State. And we're very proud of that. And we lost Dr. Derby just over a year ago. And so it's our great pleasure to get to lift her up and her legacy through this award and with our students. So please make plans to join those. We also should have some evaluation forms. I know you've been hearing this at every, Garrett has some in hand. At every session, the Mississippi Arts Commission has been supporting the Case Festival for the last 13 years with grant funding. And so your evaluations help us in our reporting to the Mississippi Arts Commission and what we hope will be continued funding next year, where we are planning on the 18th annual Creative Arts and Scholarly Engagement Festival. So please fill out your evaluations and get them to us. But we'll look forward to seeing everyone at the next set of sessions at 1:30. Thank you all.
Okay.